USA Swimming kept a secret list of banned coaches, and the children never knew. For decades, the national governing body for competitive swimming maintained an internal roster of coaches removed for sexual misconduct. That roster was not public. It was not shared with the clubs that hired those coaches, not shared with parents, not shared with the athletes whose trust had been betrayed. Coaches who were banned in one region quietly relocated to another club in another state and resumed coaching as if nothing had happened. The mechanism favored institutional protection, private bans, quiet resignations, non-disclosure agreements. Between 1990 and 2010, at least 36 coaches were banned for sexual abuse. Multiple investigative reports later showed many resurfaced in new jobs within months, sometimes aided by letters of recommendation from the organizations that had pushed them out. One coach, Andy King, moved from club to club after initial reports of misconduct and was later convicted of long-term abuse. At the time he was rehired, there was no criminal record because the first club had never called the police. The consequence was simple and brutal. The system shielded the organization while exposing children. The structural design of amateur athletics in the United States made this pattern predictable. USA Swimming operated through a federation of independently owned clubs that depended on membership, certification, and national sanctioning. The governing body set rules, issued credentials, and controlled eligibility lists. It also handled complaints. Those two roles, regulator and investigator, created a conflict of interest that skewed outcomes toward preserving reputation. Complaints were often managed with internal files and private sanctions rather than public disclosure. When allegations surfaced, the response prioritized resolution over remediation. Coaches were removed quietly, settlements were negotiated, and non-disclosure agreements sealed the details. That culture treated disclosure as a reputational threat instead of a safety imperative. Predators were not prosecuted or publicized, they were recycled. The result was a system in which institutional memory existed, but was deliberately siloed away from the very communities that needed it most. Then the secrecy broke. In a turning point that reshaped accountability, a reporter obtained USA Swimming's confidential banned list and matched names against subsequent employment records. The list that the governing body had kept hidden for 2 decades became public because a journalist insisted on transparency. That single act exposed a pattern of recycling abusive coaches and revealed the scale of a problem the organization had chosen to contain rather than confront. USA Swimming had possessed both the information and the power to warn clubs and families for years. It had decided not to. The revelation reframed responsibility. This was not a series of isolated failures, but a deliberate institutional strategy that placed organizational preservation above child protection. Once the names were public, the narrative shifted from denial and containment into scrutiny and reform. But disclosure arrived only after years in which children remained vulnerable. The human toll of that strategy is the starkest measure of its failure. The athletes affected were children whose lives were organized around early mornings, lane lines, and the authority of a coach. They trained before school, spent dinners in carpool rotations, and built their social identities around teams and meets. A coach was more than an instructor. A coach was gatekeeper to scholarship opportunities, to state meets, to a possible national team. That power differential was structural, and abusers exploited it. Young swimmers who considered reporting faced the choice between their sport and their safety, and they were told explicitly or implicitly that the organization would handle it. Handling it often meant allowing a coach to resign, offering silence in exchange for a release, and keeping the files locked. Survivors like the Arianda later described being told by officials that the organization would manage the complaint. In practice, management meant erasure. For every coach quietly removed, the next team that hired him confronted a fresh threat, often with no knowledge of prior allegations. The children's fear of losing their place in the sport, combined with the institution's commitment to secrecy, produced a conveyor belt that moved abusers from pool to pool. Change followed exposure, but remained imperfect. After the Wall Street Journal's reporting, USA Swimming published its banned list in 2010, instituted mandatory background checks, and contracted outside reviewers to overhaul safe sport policies. Congress enacted the Safe Sport Authorization Act in 2017 and created the U.S. Center for Safe Sport to remove investigative responsibility from national governing bodies. Yet the center itself has faced criticism for delays and inadequate outcomes. demonstrating that reform is neither instantaneous nor foolproof. The Larry Nassar scandal in gymnastics underscored that the issue was systemic. Across amateur sports, not unique to one federation, the central unanswered question persists. How many children were harmed in the interval between the first complaint against a coach and the day the list became public? That figure exists in records once hidden, and it is a measure of institutional choices. Subscribe to Case Files TV, because the pool should be the safest place a child can be.